On today's program, we'll discuss Jeet Kune training methods. We'll also reply to a few comments that were made on the I Love Jeet Kune page, and we'll answer a few questions about a couple questions, or maybe just one, about Jeet Kune ranks and belt system, that type of stuff. I am Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel, and this is the I Love Jeet Kune broadcast. Hello again, everyone. It's me flying solo today. Carlos isn't able to join us, and we're not able to set up the Facebook live screening. So I'm recording this here in Miami, and I've made a substantial amount of notes, which is why I'm wearing the spectacles, because I've reached that chronological stage where you need help when you're reading stuff. Regarding the comments that were received on the I Love Jeet Kune page, there was a discussion about technique, and one person's opinion was that the Jeet Kune instructors seem to teach, I guess you could almost say, they seem to teach the same thing differently, or they seem to teach different things. And that's absolutely true, but and that's because there's no magic blueprint or fixed method that was passed on from Bruce Lee to his main students, who then in turn passed it on to their main students. It's always been somewhat of a, let's call it a flexible lesson plan, a flexible game plan, and there's no standard operating procedure. There's no manual, so to speak, for Jeet Kune. But I dare say that a highly skilled, competent Jeet Kune instructor, among that group, you will find a certain similarity in their approach and in the structure of what they're teaching. So, for example, if you take a look at my approach to teaching and training, and then you compare and contrast it with, let's say, Chris Kent, Cass Magda, Tim Tackett, Rick Fay, to name a few. Even though our material won't be identical, you will be able to point out certain commonalities and certain similarities at different times in the training, and that's because we're all Jeet Kune practitioners, we're all Jeet Kune students, we're all Jeet Kune instructors, and we have, to a certain degree, the same lineage, in that we are all primarily trained by Dan Inosanto. When we talk about the commonality in training methods or training approaches, for example, all those people I mentioned will probably emphasize things like the 4 ranges of combat, things like the 5 ways of attack, things like the 5 ways of defense. But you might find subtle changes where, for example, I always teach that it's called the 4 ranges of combat traditionally and historically, but we have renamed it to be the 4 skills of empty-handed combat, which in turn was a name that I formulated based on a conversation and discussion that I had with my senior, Cass Magda, a number of years ago. And the 5 ways of attack and their counterpart, the 5 ways of defense, I tend to call the 5 ways of defense the 5 ways of counter-offense. Then some of us might examine those aspects of Jeet Kune and stick to empty-handed training when we're dealing with those, but then some people might expand that concept of not stages of combat, that concept of 4 ranges of combat, or the 5 ways of attack, and put that into your Muay Thai training, put it into your Kali training, as an example. Which brings me to a second comment that was made, which is that there is no Eskrima in Jeet Kune. I believe that statement has its origins in reputable circumstances. For example, in this Jeet Kune book, The Arsenal of Self-Expression, which I highly recommend, in here, there's a note from the author that says it says that there's been much malicious misrepresentation of Bruce Lee's art, and in accordance with the saying, talent borrows and genius steals, almost all of the technical notes that comprise the Tao of Jeet Kune and commentaries on the martial way are passages that come from other sources. You will see that there are no references to Wing Chun, Kali, or Eskrima. There's also very little coverage of grappling techniques. This is why there are only 9 pages of grappling techniques in the Tao. And that's true. It's a legitimate observation from a highly skilled and highly talented Jeet Kune practitioner. However, I've always maintained that you'll hear a lot of people, even perhaps sometimes non-martial artists, they'll tell you that they've read the Tao of Jeet Kune, right, in whichever version you happen to have, but you seldom hear them saying that they went past the Tao of Jeet Kune. I think that John Little's Jeet Kune series of books, I think John Little has written, 9, 11, 13 books on Jeet Kune. If you're not reading those, then you're missing out on a lot of information, because the Tao of Jeet Kune was, let's say, history's first glimpse into Bruce Lee's notebooks. But subsequent to that, with his own Jeet Kune series, John Little gained access to much more of Bruce Lee's writings. And so I think that in, for example, this book, the commentaries on the martial way, there is probably more notes on grappling in this book than there are in the Tao of Jeet Kune. And there's also a lot more precise and concise information about Bruce Lee's transformation from one way to the other, and we'll get into that as we go along. So for the person who said that there is no Eskrima in Jeet Kune, I think that's probably somewhere where he forms that opinion. I venture to say that Bruce Lee definitely spent some time with Filipino martial arts, as is evidenced by his performance in Enter the Dragon with the double stick. And then also his world-renowned performance with what in Okinawan martial arts I guess is called a nunchaku, which we call the tabak tuyok or olisi tuyok in the Filipino martial arts. And then this idea that Bruce Lee limited himself to simply fencing, Wing Chun and boxing, I think that in his writings he destroys that idea later on. And I think it was just as a matter of his own natural evolution. So, for example, let me see if I can put my hands on yeah, okay, I have that note right here. So, again, it's in the commentaries on the Martial Way book. And there's a thing here where he says, I'm having a Kung Fu system drawn up. This system is a combination of chiefly Wing Chun, fencing, and boxing. As for Kung Fu training, I'll have them written down when it's finished. Boy, will it be it. So obviously, yes, there was a point at which Bruce Lee, his style, his system was going to be based on those three arts. But let's see, it's in this other book, which I highly recommend. This is Letters of the Dragon. So these are representations of different letters that Bruce Lee wrote at different points in his life. And in this one, in a letter to his Wing Chun senior, William Chung, Cedro Bruce says, this is a letter that was mailed on January 4th, 1969. And he says, William, I've lost faith in the Chinese classical arts, though I still call mine Chinese, because basically all styles are products of land swimming, even the Wing Chun school. Now, people who don't have an in-depth understanding of Bruce Lee and Jeet Kune might think that in that letter, in that statement, he's actually, let's say, insulting the Wing Chun system. And that's not what's going on at all. Bruce Lee is just being honest and true to his personal experience and to his evolution as a martial artist. And so I'll say it one more time. Yes, there was a time, and it is evidenced, when Bruce Lee's system was chiefly comprised or composed of Wing Chun, fencing, and boxing. But then, as we can see in later stages of his development, he went beyond that. So if subsequent to that, some of his students or some of his followers decide to apply the concepts of Jeet Kune, the training principles, the guidelines, in something like Filipino Kali, in something like Muay Thai, in something like Pencak Silat, then I don't think that that is some kind of a violation of the rules for which one should be like executed or something. All right. And the third comment that that we came, this one was kind of funny. It was a remark from someone that I guess he considers me to be unqualified to talk about matters Jeet Kune, because it's obvious that I spend a lot of time listening to Bob Marley music and smoking weed, and I don't even train martial arts. So we'll dismiss that one until he can come up with the evidence of such. All right, so let's get on to today's topic, which is Jeet Kune training methods. In Bruce Lee's fighting method, again, let's see, here, whether you have the old version from 1977 or so, or you have the new and updated version. In Chapter 1, I think, is about basic exercises. Chapter 2 is on the fighting position, and then Chapter 3 is about footwork. And immediately he goes into the necessity for footwork. And I think there's a Bruce Lee quote that says that the essence of fighting is the art of movement, or something like that. And I guess that's why there was such an emphasis in the early days on footwork. And what I've noticed sometimes is that people will they'll demonstrate the footwork patterns. Let's say if it's in an instructional sequence, they'll demonstrate the footwork patterns, and then they'll move right on to the practicing of technique, but without paying attention anymore to the footwork, which I think is kind of that's not the approach that you should be using, because the footwork has specific uses and specific applications. So at this, I want to emphasize that the footwork, your footwork practice cannot exist in a vacuum. So you don't do your footwork drills and then you move on, and now you're doing your technique drills and you're not paying attention to what your feet are doing. And no discussion of footwork can occur without a discussion of the concept of the combat distances, right? Known as out of range, rim of fire, and in range. But we'll get to that in just a little. So if we actually let's look at that right now. So in range, as the name implies, means I can touch you, I can get to you without having to take a step towards you. If I take one step backwards, I am now on what is known as brim of fire. You'll hear me refer to it as rim of fire. I just have childhood a bad connection to a thing called brim, which was a food product that I hated. So I've taken the liberty of referring to it as the rim of fire versus the brim of fire. And then there's out of range, which would be anything more than one step away from the opponent. So in range, I don't have to move to get to you. Brim of fire, I'm one step away, and then anything more than one step away would be out of range. So now we go to the footwork pattern. So footwork pattern number 1, in the Fighting Method book, what came to be called, and I think that the best depiction, the best depiction of the footwork patterns that I have found is probably in my senior Chris Kent's book. I think I have it right here. Yep. It's in Jeet Kune A to Z, and that one, and then the Jeet Kune kickboxing book, whether you have the old version or the updated version. In Bruce Lee's Fighting Method, the first footwork pattern that's shown is the advance shuffle or the retreat shuffle. The first footwork pattern shown in Chris Kent's book is the step and slide. It's actually the same thing. I believe that step and slide, I wasn't there when that name came into being, but I think that, but for me, what I view that as an example of the continuous evolution of the art of Jeet Kune. The term advance shuffle, yeah, you know you're moving forward, but you're not necessarily told how to do it. With step and slide, moving forward, you pretty much see, oh, okay, that's you step and then you slide. So in doing that footwork, if I'm moving forward, the guiding principle is this. The foot which is closer to the direction in which I need to move is the one that moves first. So if I'm moving forward, the front foot moves first, then the back foot adjusts. If I'm moving backward, back foot moves first, then the front foot adjusts. Later on in Bruce Lee's Fighting Method, there's a footwork pattern where they just call it sidestepping. But if you analyze what they're doing in sidestep, it's actually step and slide footwork. So now there are 4 directions in which you can use. See, and so that's why they showed advance shuffle, retreat shuffle. Then they went on to the second footwork pattern, which we'll get to in just a second. And then later on, they showed sidestepping. But when we look at it as step and slide footwork, we can now move forward, backward, lateral to the right, lateral to the left. And so, again, with that principle of foot that's closer to the direction in which you want to move, moving first, when I move to the right, my right foot moves first, and then my left foot adjusts. When I move to the left, my left foot moves first, and then my right foot adjusts. And it doesn't matter if I'm in a right lead or a left lead, that rule, that guiding principle still applies. The step and slide is used for what I call general mobility. This is the adjusting of distance. Think of, I don't know if they do it now in the modern days, but in the old days, sometimes when a boxer came into the ring, once he came through the ropes, then you'd see him moving around the ring in the rocker shuffle, on the tiptoes, and he'd just be moving, not necessarily shadow boxing. Again, if you analyze what his feet are doing, he's making use mainly of the step and slide. And so now that brings us to the second footwork pattern. Again, in the old school, it's called the quick advance or the quick retreat. And this is what has been renamed to slide and step. So now it's the opposite. So when I'm moving forward, the back foot kicks the front foot into action. When I'm moving backward, the front foot kicks the back foot into action. So it's this idea. If I'm moving forward, which is that way, I go like that. If I'm moving backward, I go like that. So then this idea of moving back and forth like that leads to another footwork pattern that's called the pendulum shuffle. And that's where you would use it to, well, let's talk about uses of the footwork. Okay, so we have step and slide, and we have slide and step. Step and slide used for general mobility. Slide and step used for launching a kick and attack, but can also be used in defending, in retreating against a kick. So hence the old name, quick advance and quick retreat. Just remember that when you practice the footwork, it's slide and step, but when you apply it, it's slide and kick with the shape of the foot in whatever kick it is that you're performing. Then there is let's talk about how to train the slide and step, because we talked about step and slide, forward, backward, lateral left, lateral right. In slide and step, even though I've seen it done that way, obviously you move forward, you move back. I have seen Tim Tackett, for example, use the slide and step laterally. And then I've seen, I believe it was Burton Richardson, use it on the diagonal. Personally, for me, it's more comfortable to use it on the diagonal, but when the JKD Wednesday night group, when they apply their footwork, it is something spectacular. So again, it becomes one of those things where you have to train it, you have to practice it yourself, and then make your decision on what works best for you. Then there is the foot. Now this is an interesting historical point for me. In Bruce Lee's fighting method, the third footwork is a thing called the burst. When you analyze the burst, you realize that it is actually a combination of step and slide and step, because you take an initial step with the front foot and then you adjust thereafter. There is nothing in Bruce Lee's fighting method book called the push shuffle. This is something that you see in the later in instructional books on Jeet Kune, like the ones I've talked about before, Chris Kent's book, Jeet Kune A to Z. Also, I think also in Larry Hartzell's book, I don't have that one here with me, but Larry Hartzell's book, Enter into Trap into Grappling, there's sections on footwork in there. I'm pretty sure in Tim Tackett's books with Chris Kent, the Jeet Kune kickboxing, maybe not in Jun Fan Jeet Kune the textbook, and I can't recall if there's a section on footwork in the Chinatown Jeet Kune series. But again, as a matter of fact, I should mention this to you. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel, I'll put a link in the description to what I call my recommended Jeet Kune reading list. So let's see, we've talked about the footwork. Okay, so now let's move on to the kicking. So we are employing what is known in old school Kung Fu, the docile method of discussing our art, where we're not relying on physical demonstration of the art. We're actually talking the art as descriptively as we can. So in kicking in Jeet Kune, in the Jeet Kune kickboxing book, there is the emphasizing that there is no chamber of the kick the way there is in the classical karate, or even in the styles that have put a heavy emphasis on kicking. So like the taekwondo, or like somebody like, I do have that one here, Superfoot Bill Wallace. Yeah, here we go. In his book, Dynamic Stretching and Kicking, right, which I will admit was instrumental in my development in the early years as a martial artist. There was Bill Wallace's book. There were 3 issues, 3 volumes of an instructional book by another Taekwondo guy named Chong Lee. There was another book on stretching and kicking by the stuntman James Liu. For example, here in let me just show you what I'm talking about. Here in Bill Wallace, if you can see this, here in Bill Wallace's book, right? So that's a picture of him doing balance exercises. But you can see that there's an emphasis on getting that knee up really high. Yeah, Jeet Kune being, let's say, a more practical, more functional approach to kicking, yeah, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time getting the knee, hiding behind the knee in order to do a kick. But since kicking is fun, especially when you're younger, I spent a lot of time working on the chamber. And in that regard, I kind of, I agree with what my Jeet Kune colleague and my Boxe Francaise-Savate instructor Salem Asli says. Salem says, he who can do more can do less. Which is to say, if you can chamber and kick high, then imagine how easy it is for you to not focus on the chamber and kick low. So it depends on, you know, different factors, maybe your age, your level of flexibility, your interest in kicking high. One thing about high fancy kicking is that it can be really good cardiovascular exercise. So maybe you do it for that. Maybe you're not interested in kicking high functionally, because there isn't that much functionality to high kicks. But in any case, whatever type of kick it is that you're doing, remember to use the slide and step footwork, or the slide and kick in your exercise. We have in our system, and when I say we and our, I'm referring to what we do here in Miami. It could be different for other people around the world. We have 4 basic kicks in our numbering system. Kick number 1 is the front kick in any of its variations, whether it's the thrust kick to the stomach, the lift kick to the groin, whether it's more of a snapping variety. We have the side kick, and again, high line, middle line, low line. We have the hook kick, which is called roundhouse kick by just about everybody else in the martial art world except us Jeet Kune practitioners. And then we have the reverse hook kick, which is called hook kick by everybody else in the martial art world. So the hook kick uses the instep, whereas the reverse hook uses the bottom of the shoe, or there is a version called the heel hook. These four basics can be applied lead leg and rear leg, which would then take our kicking arsenal at a basic level up to 8 weapons or 8 tools. Again, if you want to take a detailed look at these, you take a look at any of Chris Kent or Tim Tackett's books. There are other kicks in the arsenal, like the crescent kick, the oblique kick, the stomp kick, the inverted hook kick. But in terms of a basic arsenal that you're developing, then front kick, side kick, hook kick, and reverse hook are probably a good place to start. Similarly, in punching, you can have 4 basics. Number 1, punch the jab with the lead hand. Number 2, the cross, or so that's the lead straight or the rear straight. Number 3, the hook, the lead hook, and number 4, the rear uppercut. You can stop there. For your 4 basics, if you're somebody who's OCD like I am, and so you have 4 punches and you have 4 kicks, and then my brain goes, okay, that's a pattern, I can work with that. Or you could take the punching up to 8 basics. So we had 1, 2, 3, and 4, jab, cross, lead hook, rear uppercut. 5 then becomes the lead uppercut. 6 becomes the overhand, the rear overhand. 7 becomes the lead hook to the body, and then 8 becomes the rear hook to the body. So a basic kickboxing arsenal can consist of 4 kicks or 8 kicks, and 4 punches or 8 punches, and that is probably enough material right there to spend a whole heap of time cultivating skill. Okay? Of course, no discussion of striking can take place without a mini discussion concerning the stages of combat: entry, follow-up / midpoint, and finish. So we'll take a look at, if we have time, we'll take a look at that a little bit later. But now I want to caution you about with those 12, 8, 16 techniques that we just discussed in kicking and punching. And one reason why I talk about those first is because if we go back again to Bruce Lee's 4 ranges of combat, range number 1, kicking; range number 2, punching. So the way that the way that my brain works with that, it's like, okay, you start with kicking and punching, because kicking and punching are relatively easier to learn and perform and execute when compared to trapping and grappling. And actually they tie into something else that we'll talk about towards the end also, the stages of a technique or the stages of synchronization. So we've got 8, 12, or 16 techniques in our kickboxing arsenal, so we can spend a lot of time there. One idea that I'll suggest to you is train them singly, one at a time, before you start experimenting with putting them into combination. That guideline for me is born out of the training concept or the training guideline known as the 5 ways of attack. There is single direct or single angular attack, and then there's attack by combination. So again, the way my brain works, we train all those techniques, we get good at them, let's say, in single form, and then we start experimenting with how to put them into combination. In terms of the 5 ways of attack, and I've seen these in different places, listed in different orders, so I don't know if they're ever was a significance to the way in which they're listed. As in case, there's single direct or single angular attack, which used to be called simple attack, or simple direct, or simple angulated. There's attack by combination, attack by drawing, hand or foot immobilization attack, and then progressive indirect attack. So 5 methods of attack. Right now, I would say what we are talking about in today's broadcast is pretty much single attack and combination attack. So I'd mentioned the stages of synchronization. Actually, I know that I've seen that somewhere, the 3 stages of synchronization, but I believe that if it's not called, maybe it's my mistake, but it's definitely called the 3 stages of a technique. And stage number 1 is synchronization of self, or with self, I think is how I've heard it described. Stage number 2 is synchronization with your opponent. And stage number 3 is application under fighting conditions. And I am pretty sure that somewhere, if anybody knows where I'm going with this, I have seen that as the 3 stages of synchronization. Synchronization with self, synchronization with opponent, and then synchronization with different types of opponents. I'm pretty sure I've seen that somewhere, but I couldn't find it anywhere in my notes to prove that I'm not dreaming that up. So let's talk about the stages of a technique for a while. So stage 1, synchronization of self, or synchronization with self. To me, that sounds like shadow boxing. Learning how to gain control over your own movement. This is why it's led to something that we use here in Miami, where we talk about acquiring impeccable control over your own center of gravity before you start trying to affect your opponent's center of gravity. Because trapping and grappling require what we call the skillful manipulation of your opponent's center of gravity. And so the best way in which to apply that is to have impeccable control over your own center of gravity, so you learn how to move and hit dynamically, right? Which actually it makes me think of something I should have said earlier about footwork practice. There's the static footwork practice. So I'm in my fighting position and I move here and I move there and I move there and I move there. But then there's the dynamic application where I'm up on the toes in motion in what's called the rocker shuffle, and then I apply my footwork patterns out of the rocker shuffle. So I'm not standing just in the on guard position and then I move forward, I move back, I move left, I move right. I'm actually up on the toes. Think Bruce Lee. This is a cinematic depiction of the rocker shuffle. Think Bruce Lee in the fight scene with Chuck Norris in Way of the Dragon, when he gets up on the toes and now he starts bouncing around. Right? That's dynamic practice of the footwork patterns, and I should have mentioned that before. So synchronization with self, shadow boxing, synchronization with opponent. So this is now where I've got a training partner who's holding the different, in one approach, is using the different pieces of equipment, let's say the kick shield, the focus mitts, the tie pads, and now we're both moving around, and now I'm still hitting. So the acquisition of perfect form that I was focusing on in my shadow boxing, I now carry that over into my training with my training partner. form is not allowed to become sloppy because now I've got a target to hit, so to speak. In synchronizing with an opponent / training partner, we are now learning how to apply and control distance, and we're also learning about timing, because you in the back and forth, when I flash the target, that's when my training partner moves in to hit it, and so on and so forth. Stage 3, the application of under fighting conditions. That sounds pretty funky, doesn't it? Right? Because it sounds like, we must be sparring right now. And to that I say yes and no. All right? Fighting conditions doesn't necessarily mean what that you're rushing to what we used to call in the old days free sparring. Application under fighting conditions is still a partner drill, but now we're not hitting handheld targets. So now, let's say if I'm feeding you, you're not jabbing and crossing at my focus mitts or Thai pads or what have you. Now you jab cross at my face, and now I'm learning how to apply defensive, counter-offensive, whatever the drill calls for. I'm learning how to apply that stuff under fighting conditions. So it is still a type of pre-arranged sparring. I was having this discussion with someone the other day, and I was saying, again, this is my approach. I've never been a professional fighter. I have trained just a handful of people to go into the ring with varying degrees of success. But from what I've seen, even a professional fighter cannot afford to get beat up in training, because then he can't go into the ring and do his job. So if a professional fighter has to be careful in training to not get hurt, then wouldn't a non-professional / recreational martial artist also, shouldn't they pay attention to not being hurt in practice? Because, like I like to say, everybody pretty much has to go to school or go to work the next day. So when you do this synchronization under fighting conditions, make sure that you're still, as Eric Paulson would say, engaging in partner preservation. So it's a safe training method, right? And don't be in quite a rush to get to the free sparring. That comes in time. We're getting close to wrapping up this episode, so let me start to bring things together for you, because the whole idea of synchronization really brings it, to a head for me. I'll explain to you somewhat how I came up with a structure for my own training / my own teaching. And surprise, surprise, I borrowed from the Filipino Kali in the idea of separating drills into 4 categories. Actually, there's a little bit more to it than that. Overall, there are 4 types of drills or 4 types of training, right? And this gets a little bit confusing sometimes because of terminology. So let's say there are 4 types of training, or essentially 2 types of training, and then each has a subtype. So there's solo training and there's partner training. Those are the only 2 types: solo training and partner training. But then in solo training, there are 2 methods. There's solo training in the air, aka shadow boxing, and then there's solo training on the equipment. So you're hitting the heavy bag, whether you're boxing or kickboxing. You're using the Wing Chun dummy, right, for example. So now that's solo training on the equipment. In partner training, similarly, there's partner training where we're using the equipment, feeding each other, So you're hitting focus mitts, you're hitting the Thai pads, you're hitting the kick shield or what have you. And then there are what we affectionately call glove drills, where now, depending on the severity of the training, there's different levels of protective gear, right? At a minimum, there's a mouthpiece and a groin cup for the guys, right? But sometimes there's headgear, even though that, considering the recent findings that headgear actually, if I remember correctly, leads to more head trauma. So now people are slowly eliminating the headgear, right, from the training, which might indicate that the JKD people were onto something, since my understanding from my seniors is that gradually you wanted to be using less and less protective gear, right? But in any case, so that's those are the four types of training, right? Solo training, partner training, and then each with two subtypes. Then the idea of the drills that I spoke about earlier, that I borrowed from the Filipino Kali, 4 categories. Number 1 is coordination drills. Number 2 is combat drills. Number 3 is flow drills. And then number 4 is freelance drills. So coordination drills in stick fighting would be, let's say, like a double stick thing, where, you know, we hit 1-2 with this hand, we hit 1-2 with this hand. We're not aiming to hit each other in the head, so we're at a training distance apart from each other. That's an example of a coordination drill. If we go into, let's say, a single stick, and now I hit you angle 1, and you block and hit back, and I feed you angle 2, you block and hit back. Now that's a combat drill. If I hit you angle 1 and you block and hit back, and I block and hit back to you, and you block and hit back to me, and I block and hit back to you, now we're going into what we call flow drills, right, or the counter for counter drills. In freelance drills can take on any kind of idea. It can be well, the word free is in there, so it can be the free sparring that I spoke about earlier. But it can also, freelance could just mean that we have a guideline, but we're not doing specifically a pre-arranged sequence of techniques, right? So that is an example, again, of going beyond mere empty hands, going beyond mere Wing Chun, boxing, and fencing, and applying Jeet Kune Do concepts or Jeet Kune Do principles or guidelines into another way of training, but then conversely, taking training methods from another art and bringing that into your Jun Fan or your Jeet Kune Do training. Right. So I hope that this first broadcast of this type, where we engaged in the docile method of Kung Fu training, was of use to you guys. I want to close with the question that I got about black belts in Jeet Kune Do. It was from one of the I Love Jeet Kune Do members, and he said that he had seen a TV program and a guy introduced himself as a Jeet Kune Do black belt. And what I told him is that even though there was no, there probably, I would say there was no belt system in Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do, there was a point in time in his evolution, in his development, where, I'm trying to pull it up here, the evidence for what I'm saying, where a colored ranking system did exist. It's here in this July 1988 issue of Inside Kung Fu, which is available, I'm pretty sure, online somewhere. And here it is, Bruce Lee's ranking system, and you can see there was a whole color sequence to it. And if you do a search, you can find photographic evidence that at one point Bruce Lee did wear the Kung Fu suit with a colored sash, and his students also wore Chinese Kung Fu uniforms with sashes of some sort. So I think that the rationale can be, if a colored ranking system worked for Bruce Lee at some point in his evolution, if we have I'll use a term that for no good reason sometimes has a pejorative connotation to it, and that is commercial. I will say that for those people who are teaching in a commercial setting, which means you have and operate and own a school, if the use of the black belt, the use of the belt in your ranking system serves a purpose, for me it didn't. I found other ways to recognize and reward the hard work that my students were putting in. But if the use of the colored belt system works for you, as long as it's being done with integrity and it's not, a situation in which people are, as they would say about the karate schools, buying the belt, what's the term, a belt factory, then go ahead and use it. You'll be criticized by some people. You're not going to be criticized by me. Even, I showed you the Jeet Kune book right at the beginning of the broadcast. I don't necessarily agree that Jeet Kune is only about Wing Chun, boxing, and fencing. I understand what's meant by a statement such as that, and I can see the evidence of that. I happen to think that ultimately, from Bruce Lee's own writings, from Bruce Lee's own ideas about combat, he definitely went beyond that. And so in my practice, in my training, in the time that I spend with my teacher and with my Jeet Kune seniors, like the people that I've mentioned, we've all gone past the mere empty hands portion, right? And that's just the way it is, right? Anyhow, let's wrap this up. I hope that you've enjoyed today's program. If you're watching it on the I Love Jeet Kune Facebook page, please like and share and comment to your heart's content. If you're watching it on the YouTube channel at Miami Jeet Kune, then please give me thumbs up, thumbs down, comment again to your heart's content. And if anybody has training questions, feel free to email me at jkdrebel@gmail.com. jkdrebel@gmail.com. And also, a lot of what we have talked about in today's broadcast is available in the DVD series that we are producing, and you can talk to Carlos at the I Love Jeet Kune page about that. He can give you more information on that. I think it is both a DVD series and an online training series. What else is there? I will put my Jeet Kune recommended reading list at the bottom, and email me your questions, and I'll be sure to answer them in subsequent broadcasts. And I think that's it. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel, signing off, and we'll see you next time.